we continue through our series in the book of Psalms, we are now at Psalm 136, and interestingly enough, this is the way it seems to go. It's a Thanksgiving psalm. Okay? For this to all fall into place, when you got to realize that this is almost 3 years ago we started this. And for this particular psalm to fall on Thanksgiving week, you might say it's luck, or it's random, or it's divine intervention. The latter, I think, is the most logical approach. The psalm is also interesting because each verse has the same set of words to complete the verse every time. Okay? Which is the only psalm like it, where it has one line that's identical in every single verse. But as we go through, we'll see that there actually was a purpose, like always. We're also going to delve a little deeper than we usually do in the Psalms. We're going to look at word meanings, word placements, things that should help us to really understand better what this psalm has to teach us. So I titled it Psalm 136, Thankful for Who God Is. And that's what this psalm does. It tells us who God is. So we start off by looking at God's attributes. And the Westminster Shorter Catechism definition of God is an enumeration of his attributes. God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable in his being, his wisdom, his power, his holiness, his justice, his goodness, and his truth. God is God, always has been God, and always has been the same. There's no variation. So now we start off with verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. For his loving kindness is everlasting. Okay? Now verse 1 starts off with give thanks to the Lord. The word there would be Jehovah. Okay? And you'll think, well, so what, Lord, Jehovah? Well, we're going to see where this actually makes sense. And we will actually learn the fullness of the greatness of this right at the end. Okay? So you got to remember this part when we get to the end. And then this loving kindness, that word loving kindness could be translated mercy. They're very close, similar. The original Hebrew word can be translated either which way. And we'll see why that is important. But you notice, give thanks to Jehovah, and Jehovah is the title of grace. So give thanks to our God of grace because he is good. Well, it's a simple word. We all know the meaning of good. I guarantee you don't. Okay? In Mark 10, verse 18, Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. So it gives us a foundation. This word good, being called good, being good, is only true of God. Okay? There's a whole story that goes behind this, but that doesn't matter. It's just only God is good. So now we take the original word that was translated good in the Hebrew and its meaning. Okay? And it's a long meaning. Right? Good is an adjective in the widest sense. As a noun, both in the masculine and the feminine, singular and plural, good or good thing, a good man or woman, also as an adjective, beautiful, best, better, bountiful, cheerful, at ease, fair, in favor, fine, glad, cheerful, graciously, joyful, kindly, kindness, liketh, best, loving, merry, most pleasant, pleaseth, pleasure, precious, prosperity, ready, sweet, wealth, welfare, and to be well favored. Now, memorize that so that you know when you hear the word good that this is what it means. Right? Now, do you see why only God is good? Right? No human being could possibly measure up to this standard. Right? So we're giving thanks to God because he's good. All of these. But continues. His loving kindness, which is also said could also be translated mercy. Kindness by implication towards God. That's where it's being used. It's the loving kindness is we're talking about God. Okay? That meaning is piety, beauty, favor, good deed, kindly, loving kindness, merciful, mercy, reproach, a wicked thing. It has all these positive attributes about it, but it also has a negative side because it is a reproach to anything that's wicked. See, loving kindness cannot tolerate wickedness. Verse 2 and 3. Give thanks to the God of gods, again repeated, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Give thanks to the Lord of hosts, for his loving kindness is everlasting. His loving kindness everlasting is in every verse. Now here we have God of gods. The word God here is the word Elohim. Elohim is the name of might, the mighty God. In the third verse, we have Lord of Lords. That is from the word Adonai. So Adonai is the title of his sovereignty. So even though we're using, you're seeing the psalmist is using these descriptions of who God is, God of gods, okay? God of gods, that in itself is a meaning that he is the greatest of all the gods. You say, well, there aren't no other gods. Well, yes, there are. There's false gods. There's man-made gods. There's gods that we depend upon. You know, if we're not careful, we can worship other things. They become our God. We can worship other people. They become our God. But of all the gods and the possible gods, the false gods, the made-up gods, our God, Elohim, is overall. And then Adonai, his sovereignty. Verse 4, to him alone does great wonders, for his loving kindness is everlasting. His works are all, Spurgeon had a great line, his works are all great in wonder, even when they are not great in size. Now picture this a minute. I never thought of it this way, but it's really great. In the minute objects of the microscope, we behold a great wonders as even the telescope can reveal. When you look through a microscope and you see all the activity going on, and you look through the telescope and you see all the activity going on, both demonstrate the greatness of our God. Because he's in control and he is the maker of all of that and all of this. And the psalm is going to go on and talk about God as our creator. You remember the psalm is about giving thanks because of who he is. So in verse 5 and 6, we see him as our creator. To him who made the heavens with skill, and for his loving kindness is everlasting. To him who spread out the earth above the waters, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Verse 7 through 9 continues his work as creator. To him who made the great lights, for his loving kindness is everlasting. The sun to rule by day, for his loving kindness is everlasting. The moon and the stars to rule by night, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Here's another one I really never thought about. All of this concept of creation, all those things that God did, and it starts off, he did it with great skill. Really, yeah, it took great skill to create everything. But then the why. And really the reason why God created the heavens and the earth because he had his people in mind. All of this was created for us. Stop and think. God, Almighty God, decided to create human beings. And in that decision, he said, but they have to have a place in order to live. So I'm going to create all the universes, an earth that is so unique in all the universe that it is designed to keep human beings alive. Give them air to breathe, water to drink, food, everything that is needed. I'm going to create all of these things for them. And you stop thinking, God made the sun, the moon, the stars, and then everything here on earth for us. Why? Because his loving kindness is everlasting, as we see in each verse. And then we have the other part of it, the parallel of God's mighty work with Israel. See, here the next section looks at Israel and their bondage and their freedom and all the things that came from that. But there's a real parallel between what God did in Israel and what God did in his redemptive work for us. There are many parallels. So in verses 10 through 12, to him who smote the Egyptians in their firstborn, for his loving kindness is everlasting, and brought Israel out of the midst, for his loving kindness is everlasting, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Smote the Egyptians. Okay, Egypt is, let's say, a symbol of the worldly system, the sinful worldly system. He brought Israel out, or he brought us out of this worldly system. We are no longer part of this world. And how did he do it? He did it with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Okay, he used his might and power to save us out of this sinful world. But that might and power was displayed in a way we wouldn't think would be might and power, but it is, and it was displayed on the cross. His mighty power in which he could take sinful mankind and provide a way for them to be saved that did not contradict who God is. Because God said, if you eat of the fruit, you will die. And if Adam and Eve would not have died, if we would not have died, and I'm talking about moral death, then God would have lied. Okay? So he couldn't just say, forget it. He had to come up with a plan. And of course, he didn't have spent a whole lot of time coming up with a plan. He knew the plan of how he could save his people and not contradict his own justice. Talk about a mighty hand. That's his mighty hand, the cross. And it continues on. Verses 10 to 12. To him who smote the Egyptians in their firstborn, I think we just read that. We'll just jump to verse 13 and 15. To him who divided the Red Sea asunder, for his loving kindness is everlasting, and made Israel pass through it in the midst of it, for his loving kindness is everlasting. But he overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Here again, the symbolism again. But now we're going to take the symbolism and go backwards in time, from the time that the children of Israel were taken across the Red Sea being opened up so they could cross. It was divided. That same word divided is used in Genesis 15. Genesis 15 is the first Abrahamic covenant. Genesis 17 is a more clarity of that one. But in Genesis 15, you have where Abraham is told to take these animals, to cut them in half, put one on this side and one on that side. And that was a Eastern, agreement way, kind of method. And they would pass in between the two, and if you broke your word, you were permitted to do to the other person who broke their word what had been done to the animals. Okay, so a little more than a handshake deal. Well, when God made that agreement with Abraham, Abraham did not go through in between, but God did. And God said, my promise is sure. And to the point, literally, God is saying that if I don't keep my word to you, that you may do to me what it was done to the animals. But he did not permit Abraham to go through because he knew Abraham would not be able to keep his end of the bargain. But God knew he could keep his end, and he did. Here again, it goes all points to Jesus' death and resurrection. But now you take a look back at the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, and they crossing over the Red Sea because of the fact that God opened a way. But see, back in Genesis, God went through by himself. So he went first. Now his people are going to go through. The same symbolism applies. But God made the way. And that way, again, is Jesus. His loving kindness is everlasting. And he made Israel pass through in the midst of it. God went first. God's people come after. So he made the way. He overthrew Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea. He defeated death. Jesus Christ defeated death on the cross. Spiritual death. That death that we were all doomed to have without. Verse 16. To him who led the people through the wilderness, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Okay, now we have this picture. The children of Israel are through. They're on the other side. They pass through. And they pass through all these promises. What does God do? He provides guidance, food, water, structure, leadership, healing, victory, and many other things in the same way that he does for us. And it continues. Verses 17 and 18, to him who smote great kings, for his loving kindness is everlasting, and slew mighty kings, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Throughout history, God has raised up rulers and kings and tore them down. Every single time it's because it's part of God's plan. Everyone that comes into position of power, they came there because God had a plan. Whether they be good or they be evil, God uses them. And then last time we looked at the previous psalm, we ran into Shion, the king of Amorites, and Og, the king of Bashan. Well, we got them again in this psalm, okay? But their purpose is a little different. So in verse 19 through 22, Shion, king of the Amorites, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And Og, king of Bashan, for his loving kindness is everlasting. And he gave their land as a heritage for his people, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Even a heritage to Israel, his servant, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Now, here again, you got to go back to look at a little bit of biblical geography. These two kings and their territory was territory that was given to the children of Israel, but was on this side of Jordan, the Jordan River. It wasn't on the other side. They didn't have to cross the Jordan to get to this territory. We can see the symbolism again. Because it's before the crossing, before we cross over from this life to the next life, God is providing. He's making a way for us in this life. Because he has a plan. That plan includes us. So the lands before the crossing of the Jordan, his provision in this life before we cross over. And we see that provided for us every day. Verse 23 and 24, who remembered us in our low estate for his loving kindness is everlasting, and has rescued us from our adversaries, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Ephesians 2:1, and you were dead in your trespasses and sin. Now, that's a pretty strong statement, but do you see how that ties in? Our low estate, we're dead. This is how we start off. We start off dead, okay? But he rescues us. While we were dead in our sin, he came and rescued us. He didn't rescue us because we lived up to a standard that was acceptable to him. Dead people don't do good things. Dead people don't do bad things. Dead people don't do anything. But Jesus came and made us alive while we were dead in our sin. This is where we started. So while we were in our lowest state, and we don't get any lower than dead, he rescued us from our adversary, and that adversary is sin and the devil. 25 and 26. Who gives food to all flesh, for his loving kindness is everlasting. Give thanks to the God of heaven, for his loving kindness is everlasting. God provides not just for us, but also for the animal kingdom, for everything. God has a plan, and he cares, even like Jesus said, he even cares about the sparrow. He cares for them. He provides for them. But now I told you to remember the first two verses, because now we're going back to them. Okay, remember we had God in three different ways. Now we have God at the end here. Okay? And where it says, give thanks to the God of heaven. Now this is a different way of saying God. See, in the previous ones, each one of those was something that was somewhat unique to the people of Israel. Okay, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect us, but it does. But these were names that the children of Israel used. The God of heaven is the name that the world uses. See, when you say the God of heaven, pretty much anywhere to anybody, they will know you are referencing the God in heaven. How they picture that doesn't matter. But they're not confusing that with Baal. They're not saying the God of heaven, you must be thinking of Baal. Nobody would think that, okay? The God of heaven is the God who's in heaven, regardless of what they think of the God in heaven. And that's why it's used here at the end. Because we had all of this thanksgiving to God because of who he is. And now we are, I say, kind of piling it on to the utmost. We're taking just the children of Israel out of the equation and adding everybody else. To do is to say, give thanks to the God of heaven. Why? For his loving kindness is everlasting. That one line that is in every single verse. McLaren, who's one of these smart guys, he wrote, God of heaven, therefore the final call to praise which rounds off the psalm by echoing its beginning does not name him by the name which implies Israel's special relation, but by that which other peoples could and did address him, the God of heaven.